Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Insurgent Mexico. Yeah, today we'll be getting into another chapter. So, yeah, let's jump into this. Chapter 6, Quien Vive. At dawn, I woke to the sound of shooting and a cracked bugle blowing wildly. Juan Sanchez stood in front of the cuartel sounding juvenile. He didn't know which call revelry reveille was, so he played them all. Patricio had roped a steer for breakfast. The animal started on a plunging, bellowing run for the desert, Patricio's horse galloping alongside. The rest of the tropa, only their eyes showing over their serapes, kneeled with their rifles to their shoulders. Crash! In that still air, the enormous sound of guns labored heavily up. The running steer jerked sideways. His screaming reached us faintly. Crash! He fell headlong, his feet kicked in the air. Patricio's pony jerked roughly up, and his serape flapped like a banner. Just then, the enormous sun rose bodily out of the east, pouring clear light over the barren plain like a sea. Pablo emerged from the Casa Grande, leaning on his wife's shoulder. "I am going to be very ill," he groaned, suiting the action to the word. "Juan Reed will ride my horse." He got into the coach, weakly took the guitar, and sang, "I remained at the foot of Green Maguey. My ungrateful love went away with another. I awoke to the song of the lark. Oh, what a hangover I have, and the barkeeps won't trust me. Oh, God, take away this sickness. I feel as if I were surely going to die. The Virgin of Pulque and whiskey must save me. Oh, what a hangover and nothing to drink." It is some 65 miles from La Zarca to the hacienda of La Cadena, where the tropa was to be stationed. We rode it in one day without water and without food. The coach soon left us far behind. Pretty soon, the barrenness of the land gave way to spiny, hostile vegetation, the cactus and the mesquite. We strung out along a deep rut between the gigantic chaparral, choked with the mighty cloud of alkali dust, scratched and torn by the thorny brush. Sometimes emerging in an open space, we could see the straight road climbing the summits of the rolling desert until the eye couldn't follow it, but we knew it must be there, still farther and farther again beneath, again breath of wind stirred. The vertical sun beat down with a fury that made one reel, and most of the troop who had been drunk the night before began to suffer terribly. Their lips glazed, cracked, turned dark blue. I didn't hear a single word of complaint, but there was nothing of the light-hearted joking and rollicking of other days. Jose Valiente taught me how to chew mesquite twigs, but that didn't help much. When he had been riding for hours, Fidencio pointed ahead, saying huskily, here comes a Cristiano." When you realize that word Cristiano, which now means simply man, is descended among the Indians from immeasurable antiquity, and when the man that says it looks exactly as Guatemalan might have looked, or Guatemocin might have looked, it gives you curious sensations. The Cristiano in question was a very aged Indian driving a burro. No, he said, he didn't carry any water, but Sabas leaped from his horse and tumbled the old man's pack on the ground. "Ah!" he cried. "Fine! Tres piedras!" and held up a root of the sotol plant, which looks like a varnished century plant and oozes with intoxicating juices. We divided it as you divide an artichoke. Pretty soon everybody felt better. It was at the end of the afternoon that we rounded a shoulder of the desert and saw the gigantic ashen alamo trees that surrounded the spring of the hacienda of Santo Domingo. A pillar of brown dust, like the smoke of a burning city, rose from the corral where vaqueros were roping horses. Desolate and alone stood the Casa Grande, burned by the Cheche Campa a year ago. And by the spring, at the foot of the alamo trees, a dozen wandering peddlers squatted around their fire, their burros munching corn. From the mountain to the adobe houses and back moved an endless chain of women water carriers, the symbol of northern Mexico. "Water!" we shouted joyously, galloping down the hill. The coach horses were already at the spring with Patricio. Leaping from their saddles, the tropa threw themselves on their bellies. Men and horses indiscriminately thrust in their heads and drank and drank. It was the most glorious sensation I have ever felt. "Who has a cigarro?" cried somebody. For a few blessed minutes we lay on our backs smoking. The sound of music, gay music, made me sit up. And there, across my vision, moved the strangest procession in the world. First came a ragged peon carrying the flowering branch of some tree. Behind him, another bore upon his head a little box that looked like a coffin, painted in broad strips of blue, pink, and silver. There followed 4 men carrying a sort of canopy made of gay-colored bunting. A woman walked beneath it, though the canopy hid her down to the waist. But on top lay the body of a little girl, with bare feet and little brown hands crossed on her breast. There was a wreath of paper flowers in her hair, and her whole body was heaped with them. A harpist brought up the rear, playing a popular waltz called Recuerdos de Durango. The funeral procession moved slowly and gaily along, passing the Ribeta court, where the players never ceased their handball game, to the little Campo Santo. Bah! Spat Julian Reyes furiously. That is a blasphemy to the dead. In the late sunshine, the desert was a glowing thing. We rode in a silent, enchanted land and seemed some kingdom under the sea. All around were great cactuses colored red, blue, purple, yellow, as coral in the ocean bed. Behind us in the chariot, behind us to the west, the coach rode along in the glory of dust like Elijah's chariot. Eastward, under a sky almost darkening to stars, were the rumpled mountains behind which lay La Cadena, the advance post of the Maderista army. And it was a land to love, this Mexico, a land to fight for. The ballad singers suddenly began the interminable song of the bullfight, in which the federal chiefs are the bulls, and the Maderista generals the toreros. And as I looked at the gay, lovable, humble hombres who had given so much of their lives to the comfort of their comfort to the brave fight, couldn't help think of the little speech Villa made to the foreigners who left Chihuahua in the first refugee train. This is the latest news for you to take to your people. There shall be no more palaces in Mexico. The tortillas of the poor are better than the bread of the rich. Come. It was late night, past 11, when the coach broke down on a stretch of rocky road between high mountains. I stopped to get my blankets, and when I started on again, the compañeros had long vanished down the winding road. Somewhere near, I knew, was La Cadena. At any minute now, a sentinel might start up out of the chaparral. For about a mile, I ascended a steep road that was often the dried bed of a river, winding down between high mountains. It was a black night without stars and bitter cold. Finally, the mountains opened into a vast plain, and across that I could faintly see the tremendous range of the Cadena. and the pass that the Tropa was to guard. Barely 3 leagues beyond that pass lay Mapimi, held by 1,200 Federals. But the hacienda was still hidden by a roll of the desert. I was quite upon it without being challenged before I saw it, an indistinct white square of buildings on the other side of a steep arroyo, or deep arroyo, and still no sentinel. That's funny, I said to myself. They don't keep very good watch here. I plunged down into the arroyo and climbed up to the other side. In one of the great rooms of the Casa Grande were lights and music. Peering through, I saw the indefatigable Sabas whirling in the mazes of the Jota, and Isidro Amayo and Jose Valiente. A baile! Just then a man with a gun lunged out of the lighted doorway. "Quien vive?" he shouted lazily. "Madero," I shouted. "May he live," returned the sentinel, and went back to the baile. Chapter 7, An Outpost of the Revolution. Here were 150 of us stationed at La Cadena, the advance guard of all of the Maderista army to the west. Our business was to guard a pass, the Puerta de la Cadena, but the troops were quartered at the hacienda 10 miles away. It stood upon a little plateau, a deep arroyo on one side, at the bottom of which a sunken river came to the surface for perhaps 100 yards and vanished again. As far as the eye could reach up and down the broad valley was the fiercest kind of desert. Dry creek beds and a thicket of chaparral, cactus, and sword plant. Directly east lay the Puerta, breaking the tremendous mountain range that blotted the land, that blotted out half of the sky and attended north and south beyond vision, wrinkled like a giant's bedclothes. The desert tilted up to meet the gap, and beyond was nothing but the fierce blue of the stainless Mexican sky. From the Puerta, you could see 50 miles across the vast, arid plain that the Spaniards named Llano de los Gigantes, where the little mountains lie tumbled about, and 4 leagues away the low gray houses of Mapimi. There lay the enemy, 1,200 colorados, or federal irregulars, under the infamous Colonel Argumendo. The Colorados were the bandits that made Orozco's revolution. They were so called because their flag was red, and because their hands were red with slaughter too. They swept through northern Mexico, burning, pillaging, and robbing the poor. In Chihuahua, they cut the soles from the feet of one poor devil and drove him a mile across the desert before he died. and I have seen a city of 4,000 souls reduced to 5 after a visit by the Colorados. When Villa took Torreon, there was no mercy for the Colorados. They were always shot. The first day we reached La Cadena, 12 of them rode up to reconnoiter. 25 of the tropa were on guard at the puerta. They captured one Colorado. They made him get off his horse and took away his rifle, clothes, and shoes. Then they made him run naked through 100 yards of chaparral and cactus, shooting at him. Juan Sanchez finally dropped him, screaming, and thereby won the rifle, which he brought back as a present to me. The Colorado they left to the great Mexican buzzards which flap lazily above the desert all day long. When all this happened, my compadre, Captain Longinos Guerreca, and Trooper Juan Viejo, and I had borrowed the colonel's coach for a trip to the dusty little Rancho of Bruquilla, Longino's home. It lay 4 desert leagues to the north, where a spring burst miraculously out of the little white hill. Old Guerreca was a white-haired peon in sandals. He had been born a slave on one of the great haciendas, but years of toil, too appalling to realize, had made him that rare being of Mexico, the independent owner of a small property. He had his children, soft, dark-skinned girls, and sons that looked like New England farmhands, and a daughter in the grave. The Guerrecas were proud, ambitious, warm-hearted folk. Longinos said, "This is my dearly loved friend, Juan Reed, and my brother." And the old man and his wife put both their arms around me and patted me on the back in the affectionate way Mexicans embrace. "My family owes nothing to the revolution," said Gino proudly. Others have taken money and horses and wagons. The jefes of the army have become rich from the property of the great haciendas. The Guerrecas have given all to the Maderistas and have taken nothing but my rank. The old man, however, was a little bitter. Holding up a horsehair rope, he said, 3 years ago I had 4 riatas like this. Now I have only one. One the Colorados took, and the other Urbina's people took. And the last one, Jose Bravo. What difference does it make which side robs you? But he didn't mean it at all. He was immensely proud of his youngest son, the bravest officer in all the army. We sat in the long adobe room, eating the most exquisite cheese and tortillas with fresh goat butter. The deaf old mother apologizing in a loud voice for the poverty of the food, and her warlike son reciting his personal Iliad of the 9 days' flight around Torreon. We got so close, he was saying, that the hot air and burning powder stung us in the face. We got too close to shoot, so we clubbed our rifles. Just then all the dogs began to bark at once. We leaped from our seats. One didn't know what to expect in the Cadenas those days. It was a small boy on horseback shouting that the Colorados were entering the Puerta, and off he galloped. Longinos roared to put the mules in the coach. The native family fell to work with a fury, and in 5 minutes Longino dropped to one knee and kissed his father's hand, and we were tearing down the road. Don't be killed! Don't be killed! Don't be killed! We could hear the Senora wailing. We passed a wagon loaded with corn stalks, with a whole family of women and children, 2 tin trunks, and an iron bed perched on top. The man of the family rode a burro. Yes, the Colorados were coming, thousands of them, pouring through the Puerta. The last time the Colorados had come, they had killed his daughter. For 3 years there had been war in this valley, and he had not complained, because it was for the patria. Now they would go to the United States, where... But Juan lashed the mules cruelly, and he heard no more. Farther down was an old man without shoes, placidly driving some goats. Had he heard about the Colorados? Well, there had been some gossip about Colorados. Were they coming through the Puerta? And how many? Pues, quien sabe, señor? At last, yelling at the staggering mules, we came to camp just in time to see the victorious tropa straggle in across the desert, firing off many more rounds of ammunition than they had used in the fight. They moved low along the ground, scarcely higher on their broncos than the drab mesquite through which they flashed, all big sombreros and flapping gay serapes, the last sunshine on their lifted rifles. That very night came a courier from General Urbina saying that he was ill and wanted Pablo Seafies to come back. So off went the great coach, and Pablo's mistress and Rafaelito the hunchback and Fidencio and Patricio. Pablo said to me, "Juanito, if you want to come back with us, you shall sit beside me in the coach." Patricio and Rafaelito begged me to come, but I had got so far to the front now that I didn't want to turn back. Then the next day, all my friends and compañeros of the tropa, whom I had learned to know so well in our march across the desert, received orders to move to Jaralitos Only Juan Vallejo and Longinos Guerrecas stayed behind. The Cadena's new garrison were a different kind of men. God knows where they came from, but it is a place where the troopers had literally starved. They were the most wretchedly poor peons that I had ever seen. About half of them didn't have serapes. Some 50 were known to be nuevos who had never smelt powder. About the same number were under a dreadfully incompetent old party named Major Salazar, and the remaining 50 were equipped with old carbines and 10 rounds of ammunition apiece. Our commanding officer was Lieutenant Colonel Petronilo Hernandez, who had been 6 years a major in the Federal Army until the murder of Madero drove him to the other side. He was a brave, good-hearted little man with twisted shoulders, but years of official Army red tape had unfitted him to handle troops like these. Every morning he issued an order of the day, distributing guards, posting sentinels, and naming the officer on duty. Nobody ever read it. Officers in that army have nothing to do with disciplining or ordering of soldiers. They are officers because they have been brave, and their job is to fight at the head of the troop. That's all. The soldiers all look up to someone general under whom they are recruited as to their feudal lord. They call themselves his gente, his people. And an officer of anybody else's gente hasn't much authority over them. Petronilo was of Urbina's gente, but 2/3 of the Cadena garrison belonged to Arrieta's division. That's why there were no sentinels to the west and south. Lieutenant Colonel Alberto Redondo guarded another pass 4 leagues to the south, so we thought we were safe in that direction. True, 25 men did outpost duty at the Puerta, and the Puerta was strong. So, yeah. So, many of the people he had been traveling with have now been reassigned to another post. But he's still there since he's so close to the actual forefront of the fighting. He is talking about the time he's having to spend there and the experience he's getting. Because, remember, we started along the Texas-Mexico border. We have now traveled a ways south into more desert land. But we're coming in between some mountains at an actual pass at one of these large haciendas, in which he calls the Cadena, Cardenas, it would be. It wouldn't be any. The Cardenas. But yeah. So now he's with other military parties, I should say, military parties, as he continues his quest to meet up with Pancho Villa's army. So yeah. Now Villa, as we know, is very much an everyman type of leader. He believes in handing out much of the property of the land out to the poor everyday Mexican. He is very against the inequality that had been in place. So yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.